back in the sort of late 80s with the skateboarding thing with my friends, we would go to Rockaway Beach. So we would go, it would take us like an hour and a half to get from Queens, where we were in Queens, to Rockaway. And I remember there was like a couple of summers where like the train just didn't run and you'd have to take a bus and then you'd have to take another bus. It would just take us ages to get there. And we would go to the beach, like, Beach 90 at Rockaway.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be, of course, like hardly anyone there. And, we had a few friends from Manhattan who surfed, who actually had surfboards, because everybody in my group, we only had like boogie boards or bodyboards. So these guys were like surfers with like surfboards.
Mm-hmm.
And we all just became friends. But our crew were like this motley crew of like Queens kids. And there wasn't much surf,
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking. And it was just more about just having somewhere to go and something to do, and being at the beach was really nice, as opposed to being in the city all the time, or being on the concrete on the corner of a busy street and just like trying to make it into a scene, you know what I mean? Where
Yes.
you could go to the beach and just be at the beach, and you can actually see it. You can actually see for a distance, where in the city or in Queens or whatever, it's like there's buildings and there's like, you don't get a vision of like the landscape around you,
That's Michele Lockwood. I'm Jamie Brisick. You're listening to Soundings, brought to you by the Surfer's Journal. The Journal is a member-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Outerknown, Patagonia, Rainbow Sandals, Vans, and Yeti. More like a book than a magazine, the Journal delivers 136 pages of independent storytelling every 8 weeks, covering the people, culture, travel, and art of surfing. To learn more and to subscribe, please visit surfersjournal.com. This episode of Soundings is presented by Costa Sunglasses. If you're anything like me and you spend lots of time around the water, then you know just how important it is to have a good pair of shades. And since 1983, when a group of intrepid outdoorsmen set out to make sunglasses that could stand up to the harsh environments they regularly encountered, Costa remains the choice in eyewear among those committed to life on the water. So whether you're diving in, climbing aboard, suiting up, sliding one, leaning back, or all the above, head to costadelmar.com to grab your pair and to see what's out there. Michele Lockwood is an artist, writer, photographer, clothing designer, mother, activist, and most recently, environmental scientist. I first became aware of her in the mid-1990s when I read one of her pieces in Paper magazine and learned that she surfed and had recently moved to North County, San Diego. At the time, I was the editor of Surfing and Surfing Girl magazines, so I reached out, assigned her to write a piece, and thus began our friendship. Smart, streetwise, strong-willed, Michele was much more than a freelance writer. She grew up in an Italian immigrant family in the boroughs of New York and started sneaking out to trip-hop gigs, house music clubs, and punk shows while in high school. She hung out at the Brooklyn Banks in the late 1980s and played the character Kim in Larry Clark's 1995 film Kids. The X-Girl logo, designed by Mike Mills, was based on her face, which led to her becoming a clothing designer in Tokyo with her own brand called Material. Michele has lived in Australia for the last 25 years with her partner, Andrew Kidman, on a rural property in the hills between Byron Bay and the Gold Coast. Most recently, Michele has become a researcher and environmental scientist, working for a not-for-profit Indigenous organization that helps to build more resilient communities and ecosystems. In her spare time, she studies and publishes papers on a local endangered frog species. Michele and I spoke at Big Sky, the farm studio compound that she shares with Andrew, their kids Bella and Guthrie, their dog Luna, their cat Molly, and their 22-year-old cow, who goes by a long list of names. Michele, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jamie. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, and you too. How many years have you lived in Australia now?
I moved to Australia early 2002.
Okay.
So 23 years,
And you grew up in New York
22
City?
years. I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Queens and Brooklyn and, of course, Manhattan. And yeah, it was a great place to grow up.
What was your sort of, I guess, teen years like?
Oh, my teen years were wild in a way. I had a very long lead, so to speak. My mom just couldn't really hold me back.
Hmm.
I wasn't like doing bad stuff. I just enjoyed going out. Like I went to see bands in the middle of the week in Manhattan, like all the time.
Hmm.
And when I was like 15, I was working at a club called Mars, which was like a massive 5-story building that had music on every level of the building. So I was working there, like doing a mailing list. So, like 15 years old, working at this club on the West Side Highway and 14th Street in, 1989 or something.
Hmm.
And I was just a little kid.
Hmm.
And I wasn't doing drugs and I wasn't drinking. I was just there to be part of like this the human race. I would always feel like, you're in this club with all these people. It was a 5-floor building in the meatpacking district. And on every floor there was different type of music. So there was like house music, there was like hip hop. In the basement there was like reggae and there was soul, and like Moby was a DJ there, Andre from Black Sheep, African Bambaataa. Like there was an amazing array of music, and there would be hundreds of people in there. And I was walking around this like little tiny kid holding like a clipboard
Okay.
with a mailing list and go, "Would you like to be on the mailing list?"
Wow.
And people would write like crazy names on the mailing list and
Hmm.
just write obscene things and stuff. But also the thing about it was that in order to get into the club, you needed to have a little postcard that got mailed to your house. Like you had to have an invite.
Hmm.
So to get through the door, you had to have an invite, or you would get one from someone on the street that would be handing them out at different places in the East Village or something. Anyway, so that's where I sort of like started going out.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And at that point in your life, were you into skateboarding? Were you
Yeah,
into
yeah.
hip hop? What were your sort of inspirations, or your
So
shrine that hung above your head, an invisible shrine?
yeah, skateboarding was a huge influence for sure. Like all my friends skated, and it was sort of those sort of early days, 1987, 1988. Girls weren't really skateboarding, but I just loved the culture. Like I was obsessed with it. I had like a Thrasher magazine subscription, and all my friends were skating and go to the Brooklyn Banks, and just like we had a little street corner in Queens where we all hung out, and everyone would ride their skateboards and just do like ollies and little tricks and stuff. And it was just like an excuse to be together,
Hmm.
and also like have something that bound us,
Yeah.
like as a culture.
Yes.
And yeah, that was kind of amazing when I look back at that time. And like I was obsessed with Tony Hawk, and then I met him at like a demo in Long Island, and he wound up like calling me on the phone. I lied to him that I was like 17 or something. I was 15.
Hmm.
And then he rang me on the phone. He was like, there's a party tonight. Why don't you come? And I was like, oh, I don't have a car. And he's like, oh, aren't you like, because in California, everyone drives. And of course, in New York, no one drives.
Yeah.
And anyway, it was kind of a funny thing. So I was like, I can't wait to meet him again one day to tell him that
Yeah.
what happened. Anyway.
And then, so the skate scene was prominent in your life shortly thereafter. You Kids, the film.
Yeah. So it felt like a long time after, but it wasn't. Yeah. So skateboarding, and that's those sort of early days of the Bones Brigade and all of that sort of, those aspects of what skateboarding was, I guess.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, and then like I guess in the city it was more like Zoo York, and my friend Eli was actually the guy that got me. Eli Gessner, shout out to him. He was the guy that got me the job at Mars doing the mailing list back then. And then yeah, skateboarding was just prevalent. It was like everywhere, and I think by that point I was kind of like, it wasn't like a focus of mine. I was like, I knew a lot about skate culture, and I still hung out with skateboarders, and I actually was skateboarding then, but more as a means of transport through the city, not so much like, I could ollie up a little curb, but I wasn't like ripping or anything. I could carve a bank, but I wasn't like ripping by any means. But it was, and I was with Thomas Campbell for a number of years, and Thomas was a big influence on me. And yeah, so skateboarding was always there, I guess, from a very young age. And yeah, and then I guess in New York it was like Supreme kind of, was a bit of an influence in the overall culture, not so much on me per se, but and then there was Alleged Gallery where, Aaron Rose and the whole crew there spent a lot of time at Alleged, and that was a huge influence, definitely. And all of the people who were the artists that were involved in those group shows. Mike Mills was a great friend, and there was just lots of people there that were, really interesting characters. So I basically lived at Alleged.
Yeah.
You know.
Tell me more about Alleged, because I know, so for listeners, there was a film called Beautiful Losers that sort of depicted that scene. But there were so many interesting people that came out of that scene.
Yeah, it was kind of like, I think it was just at the timing. Like it was a crux of like so many things happening where I think these counterculture things started becoming really mainstream. And it seemed like possible that like these sort of unknown, sort of homegrown artists suddenly had opportunities to make a big difference and have big group shows and be recognized by big galleries and travel the world doing things. And yeah, so that was an interesting thing to witness as well. And then I remember like being in Japan with all the Alleged crew, and they had a huge like group show thing, and it was just fucking mayhem, wild times. And so yeah, definitely was very fortunate in my life to be part of these little scenes that happened and kind of just be a bystander, not so much even a participant, but just somehow was there, and was there in a very, deep and meaningful way, I suppose.
There, but thinking about the Alleged group of people, there was a kind of DIY, there was a defiance, there was a bit of an outsiderness. They were less likely to be coming out of Yale than they were to be coming out of the streets and maybe tagging graffiti culture, I guess. What drew you to those sorts of people and that sort of scene?
I don't know. I think it just like was one of these things that just naturally happened. I mean, somehow I can't remember how. I just I lived on Bleecker Street in Broadway. I went to college at Hunter for a few years, and just lived downtown, and then probably was going to have drinks at Max Fish with, and then going to CB's. Like CBGB's was like 2 blocks from my house, and meeting people there. And then like afterwards, let's go have drinks, and you'd go to the bar, and it was Max Fish. And then down the street was the Alleged Gallery. And so you'd sort of migrate down a couple of doors down. And then that was really fun. There was always like something going on there. And it was one of those things that, the thing I love so much about New York is that there was nothing ever closed, like you could eat food at a diner at like 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
You could get pierogies, or you could, anything. It was always like 24 hours. And I guess Alleged was a bit like that too. And so it was kind of like a crash spot too. And it just kind of was inviting, and it was a space to just hang around and be amongst fun people, And then as it grew, and as the shows got more popular, like whenever there was an opening, it was like flooding out onto the street. Like it was a small space, but it just attracted everybody. It was just super fun. And as far as like it being, street art versus fine art, yeah, like I think it was very like sort of visceral, and it was like, it was really just people just being creative and making stuff without having to have this this overhanging burden of art history. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah.
It was not about having to study the, principles of, fine art or anything. It was just about basically just expressing whatever it was that was going on in your, your, head or heart space on, and then sort of making art out of it.
No, that's so well said. And I thinking about a lot of those people and several of those people I know, it's almost as if art making became like a nervous tick or a default in many ways. And many of those artists worked in, various mediums, disciplines, did all, there was a lot of hyphens in the group.
Yeah, people definitely weren't just making money from making art. I think that probably was something that was similar to a lot of those artists showing at Alleged was the fact that um, it was a natural progression of trying things out and just kind of putting yourself out there without having too much of a gallery having expectations, like a gallery in Soho or, you know what I mean, where you had to sort of fulfill some kind of requirements in terms of being a showing artist or something. It's never about that. Like Aaron was he was like a Mad Hatter, he just had this crazy cackling laugh, and he just, basically provided the space and let's just let people do their thing.
Yeah.
And then it just really became successful because it was so interesting and so different. And there were so many, so many great minds and people at that time making, really fun art that a lot of people could relate to. And a lot of that definitely came out of skateboard culture.
Yep. Tell me about the movie Kids.
Yeah, I guess Kids came out of that Alleged scene as well in a lot of ways because, Harmony was hanging around. He came in on the scene a bit later, and once again, skateboarding is the undercurrent to all of this stuff and the sort of the foundation to all of this. I think I was 19 when I was in Kids, and I knew Harmony and this other guy called Frank Sisti, and they were really good mates, and they went to NYU film school together. And Harmony's from Tennessee, and he just kind of turned up on the scene, and he was pretty outlandish character and really turned it on, and was he was fun, and he was rude, and he was pretty gnarly at times. And anyway, he was hanging out with all the other people that were hanging out at Alleged and Ludlow and Lower East Side and Supreme and the Cube and East Village, sort of just submersed in that world. And he wrote this screenplay, and yeah, I guess they were just casting for people, and it was just basically everybody that he knew, more or less, were in the film. There were a few people that were from externally found, so like Leo Fitzpatrick.
Mm-hmm.
So Leo was from New Jersey. He was like from the other side of the tracks kind of thing, and he wasn't part of that scene back then, but somehow Larry and Harmony found him, and I think he had that sort of funny lisp, and he sort of was a tall, sort of gangly type of kid, and I think they liked the way he came across. So he was cast as one of the main characters. And yeah, Larry was, the cinematographer, and he was pretty wild history. And this is before like you could Google somebody and know what they had done. But
Yep.
You'd go to art bookstores, like go to bookstores and look at the art section, and you'd see like big coffee table books by Larry Clark, and I'd be like, holy shit, this is the same Larry,
Yep.
And it was always this like really dark underside of like
Tulsa being the
Tulsa,
famous one. Yeah.
American culture,
Yeah.
where people are shooting heroin and
Yeah.
and prostituting themselves and all kinds of stuff. We knew he was kind of infamous, Larry. And so before even Kids came out, like we were doing all these photo shoots and taking photos. So like Larry was like shooting photos of me and Chloe and a few other, and Justin and this other kid who came from Tennessee. And we would do these really raunchy like photo shoots. And I'm like, and I also look back at that time and think, what the fuck was I doing?
Uh-huh.
How did I get myself in these situations? And, of course, like no parents anywhere, no like legal documents being signed here. And it's like you'd get to Larry's, like he had this big loft down on White Street, past Canal Street. And, he'd just suddenly be in your underwear and your bra. And he'd be like, okay, so you two start kissing and you get on the bed and you lay down and you sort of get on top and you do this thing. And we would just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like so weird. It
Yeah.
was a really weird thing to, now when I look back, I'm just like, what was I thinking? It was just kind of like, I don't know if it was fun. I don't know if it was, somehow there was like some level of trust or something, or art making or something happening there. But
it wasn't sort of in the realm of the like climbing your way up into Hollywood sort of thing.
Definitely not.
Yeah, exactly. It was more.
There was no
fun.
climbing of anything.
Yeah.
And like I don't even have a print from Larry, and nothing. We would get paid a few $100 here or there from the magazine or something. But I know Larry, a few years ago, he came out to Australia and showed at like, Contemporary Art, Museum of Contemporary Art or something down in Sydney. And apparently my friend was a gallery person there. And she said, Mish, there's like this 10-foot size, like gigantic color photo of you of when you were like, I was very young, like hanging in the gallery. And I never even got an invitation to go down. Like it was never like any, there was no recognition of me as an individual in that space. So I do feel like I got, sort of mistreated and, taken for a ride and used and, kind of. But, and then we went and did Kids on top of it. So all these shoots were kind of like a precursor to Kids.
Okay.
And like Justin was in it, Chloe was in it, I was in it, and Draper, that was his name, Draper.
Okay.
And Draper never made it to the film for whatever reason. I think because his accent was still a bit Southern. Mm-hmm. But he kind of got nixed, and it was Leo that got replaced as him. And then, we did Kids. And then I remember the film, it was like we shot it for, I don't know, it was really pretty quick. I think it was over the summer. And then after that, I started dating Thomas Campbell. And then we went to Greece. Thomas and I did this trip to Greece. As we were there, the film came out. Like I wasn't at the opening or the premiere or anything like that. So everybody else was there. And I had no like clue that was even happening. This is like obviously before the internet. And I just remember calling my mom from like a phone booth in Greece somewhere, like, with one of those calling cards and stuff. And she said, Michelle, my mom's got Italian. She had, an Italian accent. Michelle, you're on the cover of the New York Times. And I had no idea. So then I was, like back home, I was, my image was then, sort of projected on to, the world in a way, in my underwear and my bra and all of that. So, And so came back to that. And, then people were famous, like Chloe and Rosario and Leo, and even Justin and Harold, they sort of all kind of rose up. And so I feel like in some ways I was protected from that because I wasn't there at the opening and I wasn't really featured in any of that press stuff because I physically wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And I kind of, after that, I went and lived upstate with a family and became their babysitter. So I kind of completely removed myself from the city and needed to get out of there. I think I was kind of feeling like the environment was a bit toxic.
But I think the film, its acclaim was based upon the fact that there was this sort of verite. It was depicting this scene, this world that was really depicted from the inside out versus someone going in and trying to do it. And Harmony Korine had written it from the inside. When you were in it, did it feel like acting or did it feel like this is just I'm just hanging out with my friends doing what we normally do, but there happens to be a camera trained on us?
I mean, it was definitely like heightened experiences. Like we wouldn't have broken into the pool and gone swimming, but like Harold was Harold in the movie. So it was easy to not call him by his, I didn't have to worry about calling him by his real name or whatever because he was Harold. It was fun. It was really fun filming. I remember that Chloe and my friend Lila, who was also in the film briefly, they had an apartment on 2nd Avenue and like St. Mark's that was actually the costume designer's little apartment. And so that became like there would be like 15 people sleeping in like a one room apartment, like because it was like a hot spot, like a dropping off spot, hangout spot. And so we were really close during the filming of that film. Everybody was kind of together, and it felt like it was fun and it was exciting. And it was also like an extension of those photo shoots in a way, that we did with Larry, because, like it was kind of like you felt that you were being, chosen for something. So that was, I guess in some ways, a bit of a ego stroke or something. But, and it was also just something that we did. Like there were so many things I did and I never questioned it. I never thought that this is such a unique experience, or this is amazing. I should really like be, be grateful, or be, sort of trying to capture some element of this. I was always just in the moment. And I think that was true for a lot of people. And it was before we had phones and before we were, obsessed with all of that. You were just actually just living and taking things as they came and as they went. So that was really, it was a really special time to sort of grow up.
Did it feel like a kind of one-off, and you were acting in a film that was close to the life you were living at the time, or did you have any aspirations to be an actor? Did it, at some point you go, this would be a really great life?
I did a couple of other things. Like I wasn't like I wanted to be an actor, so I wasn't like I want to be in movies and this is what I want to be. I want everybody to know my name and my face. I was doing a bit of modeling and stuff for like Paper Magazine, and Mike Mills would always, like, kind of ask me to be part of something he was doing. And then I was like in the Sonic Youth music video, and, just sort of Marc Jacobs fashion shows. And, it was like being downtown New York at that time, and like sort of mid 90s, it was like a little hot spot for things that were happening. And I never took anything too seriously. Like things would just come and happen and then they would disappear. And I remember I was really into fashion and wearing like vintage clothes, but weird kind of, I don't know, dead stock stuff. And that was like kind of also of the time too, and what was kind of happening with the grunge thing and all of that. So it was kind of just like someone asking you to act, but be yourself, you know? We just kind of want to capture what was going on with you, and like kind of almost like a documentary sort of thing, but not quite exactly that either, Yeah.
So you, growing up in New York, you're a city girl, you're in the sort of alleged scene, you're in the skate scene, you're in the film kids. How did you, and at what point did you find your way to surfing?
Yeah, well, actually, before all of that, back in the sort of late 80s with the skateboarding thing with my friends, we would go to Rockaway Beach. So we would go catch it would take us like an hour and a half to get from Queens, where we were in Queens, to Rockaway. And I remember there was like a couple of summers where like the train just didn't run and you'd have to take a bus, and then you'd have to take another bus. It would just take us ages to get there. And we would go to the beach, like, Beach 90 at Rockaway. And there would be, of course, like hardly anyone there. And, we had a few friends from Manhattan who surfed, who actually had surfboards, because everybody in my group, we only had like boogie boards or body boards. So these guys were like surfers with like surfboards, and we all just became friends. But our crew were like this motley crew of like Queens kids. And there wasn't much surf, generally speaking. And it was just more about just having somewhere to go and something to do, and being at the beach was really nice, as opposed to being in the city all the time, or being on the concrete on the corner of a busy street and just like trying to make it into a scene, you know what I mean? Where you could go to the beach and just be at the beach, and you can actually see it. You can actually see for a distance, where in the city or in Queens or whatever, like there's buildings and there's like, you don't get a vision of like the landscape around you, it's unless you're on the train and you look out over the rooftops, but so I look back at that time too. And I think about that connection to like being introduced to that part of it,
And did you enjoy surfing? Did you have a sort of instant connection with it?
No, like definitely not. I remember getting a rash on my stomach and getting hit in the face. Like this is like like my boyfriend, who was like not really my boyfriend, but like taking me out on the board, and it like I hurt myself and it was terrible. And then I probably got a bit scared and didn't do it for a while. And then when I was like 20, 21, I started surfing, like actually started surfing. And that was in California.
Okay. And that, I think when I met you, it was the late 90s. It would have been 98, 99. I was the editor of Surfing Magazine. I was living in Encinitas, and we just launched Surfing Girl Magazine, which was the first of its kind. And we were looking for writers. And I think you'd written for Paper Magazine, maybe?
Yeah.
And so how'd you get into journalism? And then let's get into the surf stuff.
I remember I had written up a story about a North Carolina girls surf contest. And from that little piece that I had written, I got contacted from like all these weird different magazines and stuff, like surf mags or, sport and culture mags and stuff, as like, as a writer, like, could you write us a story? And I was like, I'm really not in that world, but I just happened to like somehow get some information on this girls surf contest. And, suddenly I was, sort of deemed a female, surf reporter or something. And I really was definitely not, but I took the work and did as much as I could with it. But it was actually, now that I put those things together, there was an all-girls skate company called Rookie that my friend Elska and Catherine did out of their little apartment on Canal Street. And Rookie was like the first all-girls skate brand. And I actually started to work for Super X Media and with Takuji Masuda and Art Brewer and all of those kind of like
Craig Stesic, Scott Hewlett.
Craig and Scott Hewlett. So that was a little bit later. That was more when I was living in California. So after New York and the babysitting thing, Thomas and I moved to California. And then I started doing more journalism. And I studied, writing at school and was, a decent writer and, did that sort of thing. And also was always taking photos. So I always shot pictures and had my own dark room. I was doing that in high school. There was like a dark room in one of the closets. So developing film and developing black and white photos and stuff. So had a little bit of skill in that area and was able to use that to my advantage. And then so when I moved to Southern California with Thomas, actually we moved to Santa Cruz. And then we traveled down to Baja and lived in Baja. We traveled all the way down to Punta San Jose and surfed the whole way. And that's where I sort of learned to surf a little bit over those like 3 months in a VW van and like really, very cliche sort of, visually cliche kind of experience. But it was great. It was amazing. And we had such a good time. And that's when I kind of started learning to surf, or at least being on a surfboard and paddling around and getting the feel and catching little waves and stuff. I was also traveling back to New York quite a bit during that time too, because, airfares were cheap and I could go back to New York and make some money, as a photo assistant. I worked for Cheryl Dunn and did a bunch of other stuff and did photo stuff and journalism stuff, and then would travel back to California and trade stories, for different magazines on either coast about what was happening on the other side of the continent, sort of thing.
I relate to that very much, and I think somehow that traveling lifestyle, that is a big part of surfing, and I think you and I know well. Speaking for myself, I just feel like wherever it's sort of this great kind of adaptability. Wherever I go, it's not really the question of like, is this where I belong or is this where I need to be? It's more like, how do I just sort of maximize this place and draw from it the things that I want to draw from it and flow with it and find a kind of equilibrium with it all.
Yeah. And, also like sharing the good stories of that place too,
Yes. How'd you find your way to Australia?
So I was with Thomas and we would travel quite a bit, and we came to Australia in 99 for the Y2K. The whole world might have gone crazy because of the computers that couldn't flick over to 2000.
Yes, I remember it well.
It was like a thing that people were kind of contemplating. And so we thought, oh, well, where's where's it going to first happen? What, like, so Australia obviously is in the east here. And so we thought we'll go to Australia for it. And so we traveled here and was very deep into surf culture by that point and surfing a lot and very obsessed with it and really loving that life and, kind of probably fobbing off a bit in terms of having other, real jobs and doing things that, other people might be doing at that point in their life. So we came to Australia and we rented an old farmhouse and Thomas was getting ready for a big show in New York, so he basically covered the walls with black plastic and put up like big pieces of paper and just started madly painting. And I had a sewing machine and I was really into sewing and making clothes. And went to all the op shops and got all the old fabrics and started making clothes, mainly for myself, but just other things I would send to friends back home and things like that. That's the short version.
But you felt a connection with Australia?
Oh, I loved it here. It was like, as I'd imagined California probably would have been, 50 years prior or something. It was just real quiet and where people are like, oh, surf's crowded today. It would be like 4 people, 5 people out, It was a lot of fun surfing. Yeah. Small waves, point breaks, pretty mellow.
Yeah.
Yeah, crowds.
I moved to Australia when I was 23. I met a girl who lived in Sydney, and I was a pro surfer at the time, and I was on the tour. So when I lived in Australia for about 3 years all up. But during that time, I was traveling a lot. But when I think back on it now, I mean, a lot of it was the connection with Australian culture. The waves were much better than what I grew up with in Los Angeles. But I look back now and I think there was a thing of sort of escape and escaping myself and the idea of getting to sort of reinvent myself and not, it's almost like when you become an expat in a new country, the trail of history that we all drag behind us gets almost like severed and we land in a new place and we get to kind of reinvent. Did you feel some of that?
Yeah, I totally relate to what you're saying. And of course, like all of that is before the internet where that whole trail of stuff would follow you.
Yes.
So you could just kind of get on a plane and get off the plane and be, someone completely different if you wanted to be. And I loved Australian culture too when we first arrived and like having a pie and, kind of understanding and like the slang and the way people spoke. And I still kind of love that too, Yeah, it was fun and it was refreshing in a lot of ways. And, also when I did decide to move to Australia, it was after September 11th. And, it was a bit crazy in Southern California with people like becoming incredibly racist and, wanting to bring on World War III. And it was a bit scary, and I kind of felt like it was probably a good time to leave. I remember, driving down Pacific Highway, and there would be people had put up like sheets on the overpasses with, racist comments about Arabs and. And suddenly everyone had an American flag on their antenna of their giant Ford Ranger or whatever the F they were driving. And, and also not seeing the hypocrisy of the gas guzzling, because that was what the war was about, and it was just it was too much. And I was ready to get out. I was ready to fold up that chapter and put it in a box and move on. In a way. And I had personal things too that I was going through. So it was a good exit point.
And you landed here in UK?
Not directly. It took a little while. I landed in Sydney and lived down there with my partner, Andrew. And that was so fun. We rented a friend's place on the northern beaches, and that's where Andrew's from. And, Derek Hind lived down the road. So Derek was at our house like every day. And he was a character and I'd seen Derek in Litmus and read some of his stories and surf mags and stuff. And so it was really fun to hang out with Derek. and he's like a one of a kind guy. And all the other characters of you'd see Terry Fitzgerald like sitting there, and then there was Simon Anderson like over there, and then you're like, holy shit. So it was kind of cool. There was so much surf culture here in Australia that I really appreciated and knew the value of, and and was grateful to meet people here and be totally freaked out by it as well. It's kind of starstruck out about everywhere, So,
what parts of the Australian culture did you enjoy most when you were as you were kind of getting deeper entrenched in your life here?
Well, probably now, most recently, is Aboriginal culture, really, because I've become involved in looking at the history of this place and appreciating the First Nations people of Australia, and kind of understanding the things that happened before white people came here, and all of the things that go along with that, lots of atrocities and stuff that I won't get into because it's kind of sad and tragic, and this is a surf podcast. But and finding that has given my life a great deal of depth and appreciation, and there's so much there to dive into and to educate yourself about. So
did that happen quickly for you, or was it over time?
No, not at all. Not quickly. Slowly and steadily, I guess. And living here where we live, and we look right out Wollumbin, which is for the Bundjalung people, like the local people of this area. That is like the creation story of part of their dreaming, and we stare at the mountain from where we live here. So it kind of, I think it educated me more so than me sort of seeking it out. In a lot of ways, I was kind of wanting to know more about, whose land we were on, and what that meant to also be a custodian of the place where you live. And but it is definitely part of white privilege in any colonist country that you just kind of forget. You don't want to know about the First Nations troubles, or the richness of their culture, or the inconveniences they may cause you, or whatever it might be. But I've definitely gone the other way, and have, sort of welcomed all of those things into my life, and wanting to learn more about that stuff. Yeah.
What's your life like here? And I say that just to sort of paint the scene for the listener.
Oh, yeah.
It seems impossible not to be kind of integrated with I mean, you're just so aware of your natural surroundings, and you're looking at this lush greenery everywhere.
Yeah, so from as a little kid growing up with the J train running outside my bedroom window in Jamaica, Queens, I remember like trying to rehabilitate pigeons that were sick. I'd bring a pigeon into the house in a cardboard box, and so I always had this kind of feeling of wanting to care for things like species and animals, and and then even in high school, I was a vegetarian and was part of the anti-fur movement, and people for the ethical treatment of animals. It was always like in my self, in my DNA somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a natural progression to eventually end up here and living in this space where it's very green, and lots of trees, and lots of plants and animals and birds and reptiles, frogs, everything. And fresh, clean air, and being in tandem with the seasons and, weather patterns, and like I said, that cultural history of the place. So yeah, it's taught me as much as I've had interest in it, and yeah, I'm like to the point where I went back to uni again and got another degree, and this time in like ecology, and that's kind of brought, because I wanted to just with climate change and all the other things that are happening on our planet, it's like I just wanted to be a positive contributing force to what was happening. And I did meditation for a while, and I got really into Ram Dass, and sat for long periods and just kind of was asking, whatever it is, the higher spirits to put me in a place to do the right thing, to help be part of a solution to what was happening on our planet. And that's when I had an epiphany to go back to school. And I did that when I was in my 40s and my kids were, I don't know, 7 and 10 or 9 and 12 or something like that. And it wasn't easy. It was really hard because I'm not a scientific thinker, and I had to take chemistry and do maths and all that kind of tricky stuff. But I did really well, and I pushed myself really hard, and I took it all very seriously, and finished my degree. And if I was younger, I might have done a PhD, but just really now just quickly wanted to work and be involved in solution finding and being part of a solution to some of these atrocities that are happening on our planet. If everybody could pitch in and do a little bit, I think would be a great way to at least alleviate your mental health, because you feel like you're doing something to be on the right side of that history, and not just the history, but what's happening right now. I mean, it's amazing how many people are still the climate deniers, or they're just still not part of haven't changed any part of their lifestyle, to just accommodate, our environment and our, climate and our future. So it's, so that's kind of what I'm doing now, I guess. Yeah.
You have a relationship with frogs.
I do have a relationship with frogs. Somehow that happened. We have a creek on our property and had some friends who were frog people come and visit. And one of the guys said, "Oh, looks like you're going to have this certain species of frog at your creek." And it was a threatened species or a vulnerable species. And so that night we went down with torches and headlamps and we had a look, and sure enough, the frog was there. And so I became absolutely obsessed with this frog and wanted to make the creek as nice as I could for this frog. And I did. And I studied it and did surveys with a local scientist who works for our local council, and wound up doing a 4-year study on this frog species called the great barred frog. The giant barred frog. The great barred frog is its cousin, the giant barred frog, and have now submitted our second paper, a scientific paper on that species. So it's it was like a great gateway species to learn about, and it really helped me to sort of understand my little ecosystem that we live on here. So, and understanding how everything is so connected and
Hauling up curbs in your teens and now studying frogs hopping around out in the creek.
Yeah, it's crazy.
What is most fascinating about frogs? Because I know very little about frogs.
Well, they're just like an indicator for, if your waterways are healthy, or your environment and the air and the they're like, they'll let you know by being there or not being there how healthy your system is. And the frog I study is like 30 million years old. Like, they have a fossil record for this guy, and to think that frog has persisted on the planet for that long, and they're still living at my creek here. And the sound that frog makes was a sound that people, from the start of humans evolving on the planet, they also heard that sound.
Yeah.
So it kind of is a connecting point for humanity in a way, if you want to think of it like that. And I just find them so cute, and they're so funny, and they have really specific needs, all of them. And, you have to treat them carefully in some situations, and they're just fascinating. I love being out. Like, I had a nightlife, in New York, where I would be out till 4:00 in the morning till the sun came up, and eating pierogies at Veselka, well, still drunk and all the rest of it. And now I'm like down at the creek in the dark, looking for frogs until 4:00 in the morning, and
incredible,
listening to them calling. Yeah,
incredible. And I know there's a lot of wildlife around here. Have you seen? You see snakes, you see birds. What? Any great stories there?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, they're just outside our door. We literally, like, they'll come into the house. You know what I mean? It's the biodiversity here where we live is pretty incredible, and we do a lot. Like, pretty much all of my land management things around the house and where I live, this area where I live, is all for the sake of increasing and maintaining the biodiversity in our area. And I think that my kids even get jealous because I care for the birds and the frogs and the snakes and everything else almost more than I care for them in a way. And they just have to deal with that. So yeah, you can actually hear the galahs out there chirping. They put up a couple of nest boxes for them so that they can make their babies, because the hollow-bearing trees have all been cut down. And so we do everything to sort of grow our little family out there, and I do look at them as my kin, as an extension of my family, because they bring me happiness, and they tell me their stories and their way that they do things, and they live and they move. There's a lot when you start paying attention and observing, you actually realize there's so much going on, and there's so much that you can learn from just by quietly watching and observing over time. So and listening, and yeah, I love that. I love that part of it.
The bird song is so vibrant around here. And when you listen, do you know this sort of species?
Oh yeah, all of them. Yeah, I do. And when there's one that I don't recognize, it drives me mad. So I will record it and then either ask somebody who knows more than me, or wait until I hear it again and do doing some deductions on what it could possibly be.
Incredible.
So yeah, I'm definitely obsessed with that. Mm-hmm.
I love this very much, Michele. Favorite surfer?
Oh my God, favorite surfer. Yeah, I'm going to say my friend Margaret Kilgallen, because I miss her. And she was always really fun to surf with, and always so beautiful on a wave. Yeah, Margaret.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I met Andrew Kidman on a bus. No, sorry, I met him in the surf at Narrabeen in 1986, and then I saw him later that evening on a bus going to Manly to see the Lime Spiders play. Yeah.
I've heard this story.
And we've been friends for many, many years.
Yeah.
And I have Andrew's one of my dear, dear friends. Andrew's made a lot of work that has been sort of seminal in the surfing world. Has it been interesting to sort of be there for a lot of that and watch that happen?
You've known Andrew a lot longer than I have, but for the time I've been with Andrew, which is well over 20 years now, it's amazing watching him, because he is so self-motivated. Andrew doesn't work for anyone. He works for himself, and he is completely driven with whatever it is at the fore of his mind. He will go and tackle that thing or create that thing until it comes into fruition in the way that he sees it or wants it to be. So it could be a song, it could be an album, it could be an art show of photographs or screen prints or paintings he's done, or it could be surfboards he's made. It could be his veggie garden down the bottom with all the stuff that we eat every day. He just is incredibly self-motivated, and so that's kind of a pretty cool human to witness on a daily basis, as much as we drive each other mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that happens.
Yeah.
Motherhood. Let's talk about motherhood.
So yeah, I've got 2 great kids, and they're probably my best friends, especially living out here in rural Australia, where there's not a lot of people around, which is a good thing. My kids and I are pretty close, and I love them dearly. Then they, taught me so much about, they're so smart, and I think kids now, they're just like exponentially progressive in so many ways, because they have phones in their hands and they can see what's happening in the world, and they have this way of interpreting things and processing things that is inspiring. And even just their well, I don't know if this is everybody, but my kids have real social justice. That's something that's come to the fore in both of their behaviors. They just see things and want, other people to be treated fairly and equally. And, and they're both really staunch about that. And I think that that's a great thing. And I think that, while we've, somehow had to raise our children within the internet sphere, there are positives about that, because you develop empathy for people around the planet who you might not have, witnessed or met or understood anything about them. And now everyone sort of has a platform to share their living conditions or their culture or their music or whatever it might be. And I think that sort of brings us together in some ways. You'd think it would be working better than it is, but in some ways it's brought us together as a planet.
Yes, yes. Relationship advice?
Oh God, I'm the worst at that. I'll say don't do what I do, which is usually close the door and ignore everyone.
But you too. I admire you two tremendously. I think I look at you guys as a family unit, and it's
we go through ups and downs like anyone, I guess. But I definitely I like I'm terrible at times with talking about stuff, or like I've never had a therapist, or I've never like had counseling, or never did couples stuff or anything like that. And I kind of look at friends who have done that and always go, oh, that would be kind of cool to do that. But I just don't go there.
Mm-hmm. Do frogs teach you anything about relationships?
That the females are bigger and stronger, and they do a lot more than just provide the eggs.
Really good.
And the men, the males are the ones who make the sounds, and they're the ones that croak and call. But it's the females that are generally, they're more rare in the landscape. So there's always more males for some reason than there are females. And some of the things that females have to do to be able to see their babies through is kind of incredible. So, shout out to female frogs.
Yes. Yeah. Last question, and I promise to let you go. I often think, and this is sort of like a massive, massive question, but what is the good life, Mish? And I say that in the sense of you grew up in New York, you grew up in all the stimulus of lower Manhattan, and you now live in this rural, gorgeous rolling hills area. Yeah. And it's a different lifestyle, but you're integrated with nature. I mean, in your experience, what's important? What matters? How do you do it?
Oh, I mean, it's really on an individual level. I can't say what matters, what should matter for everybody, but what matters for me, I guess, is being in the moment. And I think that's what's always gotten me through, and appreciating, kind of what's in front of you and what's around you, and never taking things for granted, because nothing lasts. Things are always moving in some state of flux, and embrace that. And enjoy people while they're here with you, because, people die. And, we miss our friends, and we miss our people that have passed. And, sometimes you look back and you go, I wish I would have said that, or I wish I would have hugged that person, or told them actually how much I really did appreciate them, or whatever it might be. It's one of those things that, and as you get older, you realize, people are passing, more frequently, and, I guess make the most of your day, but also communicate to other people what they mean to you, because you never know what other people are going through too. There's always more to the story than what's happening on the face value. So be gentle, be kind to yourself, but be gentle and be kind to others.
Thank you, Michele.
Thanks, James. Lovely speaking to you.
And you.
Yeah, thank you.
Soundings is brought to you by the Surfers Journal and is produced by me, Jamie Brisick, and Jonathan Shiflett. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Our theme song is Give Me a Wave by Oscar Matumia and Paz Lenchantin. The Surfers Journal is a reader-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Outerknown, Patagonia, Rainbow Sandals, Vans, and Yeti. The journal is published bi-monthly. If you haven't done so yet, I encourage you to visit surfersjournal.com and subscribe. This episode of Soundings is presented by Costa Sunglasses, the badge of the explorer. For over 40 years and counting, Costa has remained steadfast in their dedication to not only crafting the most durable, functional, and long-lasting eyewear, but in protecting our waterways and natural resources. Whether you're on the back deck scanning for yellowtail, eyeing a set swinging wide at an empty point, camped out on a bluff at the end of a rotted two-track, or anywhere and everywhere in between, Costas are built to help you see what's out there. Head over to costadelmar.com today to find just the right pair for you, no matter where the water takes you. Thank you for listening to Soundings, and until next time.